from the Denver Broncos Media Center, welcome to Broncos Country Tonight with Ryan Edwards and Benjamin Allbright.
All right, here we go. Welcome to Broncos Country Tonight. We are previewing the Broncos and the Steelers matchup, Week 5 in the NFL. And Ben, let's go ahead and start with the Steelers offense. And that group overall has been struggling a little bit to get out of the gates. Now, we know that Najee Harris is a very talented player, but even he is having a difficult time getting on track because they are just not passing the ball very well. They're not running the ball really well. And if you watch enough Steelers games, it almost all comes back to that offensive line, which is not only injured but struggling.
Well, yeah, ever since Mike Munchak left the Pittsburgh Steelers, their offensive line play has been in decline, and you would hope that for the Steelers' sake that this is rock bottom for them. It has not been good. They can't run the ball. They can't sustain blocking in order to pass the ball deep. They're just a team that's in disarray because of that. And when you've got a quarterback who is basically a statue back there, having an offensive line that can't protect you is just not a great thing. Steelers won 4 last 5 against the Broncos, and I think this is one they can get back off the schneid on.
Yeah, and I'm going to start here as far as matchups go because when you look at the offensive line and per Pro Football Focus, 40% of the pressures that have gone against that offensive line have come from the left tackle. And their left tackle is, got to pull this up here, is actually Dan Moore. Mm-hmm. And he's responsible for, I believe, 17 pressures so far on the season. And so he isn't necessarily the guy that was supposed to be starting this year anyways, but he's a rookie that was drafted from Texas A&M, and he's kind of forced in production. But by the way, that 40% is the third most in the NFL for an offensive lineman. So if your left tackle is right now performing at your worst level as an offensive line, that's a pretty massive problem overall because, again, that's the blind side.
Right, and their offensive line is just not good top to bottom, even with the injuries and everything else that's going on. They've hemorrhaged players over the last couple of years. DeCastro's no longer there. Villanueva's no longer there. And as a matter of fact, the right side of their line, Try Turner, Joe Haig, and J.C. Hassenauer, 2 of the 3 of those guys are AAF players. So,
right.
That should give you an idea. The AAF, the problem with some of those spring leagues, the AAF and the XFL, was that the offensive lines weren't good enough to, on all the teams to make it work. So
I think a lot of the blame goes to Ben Roethlisberger, who certainly doesn't look like he is himself out there from what we're used to seeing. But I really do believe, and you told me this a few days ago when we were sort of starting to talk about that team, I started saying, hey, Ben Roethlisberger doesn't look like the same quarterback, and he doesn't. But the offensive line isn't doing him any favors. They aren't doing any favors for the run game, and certainly not doing any favors to get any receivers downfield like they want to. So you notice that their average of 6.1 yards per attempt on passing is a result of the fact that they just don't have any time.
Mm-hmm. They got rid of Randy Fitchner, the offensive coordinator from last year. They wanted to run the ball and buy Ben Roethlisberger more time. Well, they bring in Matt Canada, and they're throwing the ball even more. So it's just been a situation where it's a comedy of errors and a compound situation. You got a quarterback that can't move, an offensive line that can't block, and receivers that don't have time to get downfield.
Yep. So the matchups in that respect kind of favor the Broncos. So for everything the Broncos had to do this last week against Baltimore, where they had to be very careful about maintaining gap discipline, not allowing Lamar Jackson to step up and maybe do something with his legs, this isn't that game. At least the way this looks right now, the Broncos can kind of play their defense fairly straight up, it looks like to me.
Yeah, defensively, this matchup obviously favors the Broncos, and you don't have to bring a whole lot of pressure, which kind of favors what Vic Fangio wants to do. So, overall, I think in the offense versus defensive sense, the Broncos have an advantage here.
Yeah, you don't want to overlook anybody, certainly. No. And the moment you start saying, well, Ben Roethlisberger is washed and he can't play anymore, that's the moment that Ben Roethlisberger, who's a Hall of Famer, future Hall of Famer, digs deep and does something and embarrasses you. Meanwhile, for the Broncos offense, this is going to be a tough test. The Steelers defense is still just as formidable, and really kind of only the reason that the Steelers have been in any of these games whatsoever. In this last game against the Packers, they actually had a chance on special teams to have a return touchdown, but then they had an offsides penalty. That game actually probably could have been closer, potentially should have been closer. But listen, man, the Steelers defense, they're going to be flying around the ball. The biggest concern has to be, as we just talked about the Steelers offensive line, biggest concern has to be the Broncos offensive line.
Steelers defense has the advantage in this one. They're a better defense than the Broncos are in offense overall, especially when TJ Watt is healthy. He's a game changer and a game wrecker. And, the Broncos are definitely going to have to up their game in terms of their protection because they're good all along the 5 that rush the quarterback. They like to send 5. And They're big inside. Casey Hayward plays that defensive end. He's more of a nose tackle, and I mean, it's more of a defensive tackle, not a nose tackle. They got, Bucks. They got guys in there that are huge, big bodies along that defensive line and gap eaters. So your line's got to be on its P's and Q's. I think overall, one of the things the Steelers are so excellent at doing is stripping the football. Yep. They chop at the ball every time, and they're up there in the league in forced fumbles. So that's one thing you got to be cognizant of. The Broncos haven't really fumbled the ball this year, but they're going to have to be cognizant in this game. Well,
they have in a couple red zone moments, and that's certainly something you don't want to come back. And the Steelers are a good red zone team. The one thing that they really struggle at, they're kind of middle of the pack as far as the stats go, but I'd say some of that has been matchup dependent. The fact is the offense hasn't really been helping them out. They're poor at third downs. And it's interesting because we've been talking a ton about the Broncos and their third down production on offense. The Steelers come into this game allowing 45.5%, 25th in the NFL. And that might be an opportunity for the Broncos if they can get some of the quick passing going, not allow that pass rush with TJ Watt to get to them. Maybe there's some opportunities to get the quick passing. They have to get some run production going. I mean, there's really no way around it in this game. The Broncos have to find a way to commit back to what they are good at, which is the run. And you know what? As it turns out, this team gives up about 100 yards rushing per game, which is, again, pretty good, not terrible or anything along those lines, but it doesn't mean they can't have some opportunities.
Give the ball early and often to Melvin Gordon. Sprinkle in a little Javonte here and there, but until he kind of gets going, I mean, he had the big sexy 31-yard run, but the reality is a lot of his runs are 1 yard or fewer, and then he breaks off a big one. He needs that kind of stuff to get going. We need a guy that can be reliable right now. Feed Melvin Gordon right now and work Javonte in once that defense gets a little more gas so he can break off those big runs.
Yep. So some interesting matchups. I think the last thing I want to add here is the Steelers are kind of dangerous on special teams. They are top 10 kind of across the board in several of the metrics there. And the Broncos have been susceptible. And so this is one of those games where we just talked about the Broncos are favored defense versus that offensive line of the Steelers. Same kind of situation for the Steelers defense versus the Broncos offensive line. If you're looking at teams that are kind of evenly matched, which is what this looks like, special teams could be a deciding factor, and that needs to be something the Broncos shore up.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't lose this game, play a good game on offense, a good game on defense, and lose this game on special teams.
No, that would be obviously quite traumatic there. McLeod is their returner, by the way.
Ray McLeod.
Yep. He's a good player. He's averaging 26.6 on kickoff and about 11 yards on punt return.
That's a huge number.
Especially on kickoff, that's...
11 yards per punt return is a huge number.
It's a pretty big number, too. So something to pay attention to. All right, there you go. We'll see how the Broncos do. We'll, of course, react to it next week right here on Broncos Country Tonight. Benjamin Allbright, I'm Ryan Edwards. Thanks for watching.